Hi, I'm Lucia Gonzalez, and I'm a journalist working for the BBC World Service Languages.
Hi, I'm Becky Rush. I'm one of the software engineers working in the visual journalism team for BBC News.
And I'm Sean Willmott. I'm a UX and editorial designer, also working on the same team.
So we're a team broadly consisting of journalists, including world service journalists, data scientists, designers, including UX specialists, and developers, as well as testers. Our team includes a number of world service hubs, which are mini versions of the team spread out all over the world, specializing in creating regionally specific content in locations such as Jakarta, Nairobi, and Moscow. We work together to make complex data and stories engaging and easier to understand.
The World Service Languages is home of the BBC News website in 40 different languages. In 2021, it averaged 130 million plus views on online digital.
And this presentation is our call to arms, because adapting your data visualization or your interactive content is not just about translating and then maybe sometimes flipping from right to left. It takes a multidisciplinary approach, and it needs an open mind and a will to be learning constantly about how users interact with our content all around the world.
Yep, so it's not just about right to left and aligning. So looking at fonts and scripts, we have 40 different languages plus English. We have 4 right to left languages. We also cover most scripting languages such as Latin, Cyrillic, Chinese, Sinhalese. We also have a mixture of Latin and with some glyphs like Turkish. In terms of numerals, we cover Western Arabic and Eastern, as well as Burmese, Bengali, and Nepali. We have our own bespoke BBC font, which is called Reith, and this is based on our founder, John Reith. We also use a bit of open source fonts such as Noto Sinhala as well. And what flips from right to left in terms of design? As mentioned, we have 4 right to left languages. This is Arabic, Pashto, Persian, and Urdu. And we have to design with this in mind. So we have to think about, is it the text? Is it the graphics? Is it the icons? Is it the charts themselves? And we use our local on the ground language experts in each hub to help us with this as well. And looking at calendars and numerals, so yeah, we use a mixture of Western Arabic and Eastern Arabic. We have some exceptions like Burmese, Bengali, and Nepali as well. And calendars, we use the Persian and Thai solar, as well as the classic Gregorian. Looking at our designs, so we always think about designing mobile first, and to get through this, we basically have to understand our audience. We know that the majority of our audience, and that's 80+%, is on mobile. In some regions, that's even greater. And we know that in the COVID pandemic as well, that this didn't change. So from people working from home, they're still viewing their content on mobile first. We know that in some countries like Nigeria, mobile data is relatively very expensive, and it's around $2 per gig. And we know that in India, where we actually have our biggest world service market, it's a lot cheaper. In terms of UX design, we think about our design and starting very, very small. So we start with a 320 point width breakpoint. This is basically what an iPhone 5 is. And we know that if we start this small, that we can cover most legacy devices, not just your fancy iPhone in the Western world. And in terms of our UX quality assurance at the end, we use a mixture of Google's inspect mode, we use browser stack, we use our in-house testers. And this is all at the end of the project where we'll go through and we do some testing and quality assurance to check that throughout these breakpoints that actually our content looks beautiful. So in terms of an example, we can show you our COVID-19 tracker and map, and this was an interactive that we developed at the beginning of the COVID pandemic in 2020. And it was published in 40 languages. It was a huge effort amongst all the different hubs and teams to create this, and the main goal was to make it easily understandable and accessible and relatable for our audience. One of our regional hubs in East Asia, the Jakarta team, made a very quick example of this. So they had a long table and they had a map that you could click on with an expandable table at the bottom.
So it's not just text that we translate, we also translate dates. So in these two examples, also from the COVID tracker, we've translated the dates for Persian and Thai into their respective calendars. So in the Persian one, we've got it as the year 1400, and in Thai it's using their solar calendar, and it's the year 2565, which is the equivalent for us in the Gregorian calendar of 2022. We also do the same thing for numbers and translate them into their respective languages. Here, these examples are in Persian and Nepali. The key thing here, though, is all of these all feed off one data set. So there's one data set that feeds the COVID mapping table for every one of the 40 languages. And we translate it all automatically into the relevant calendars and languages using our in-house number format script, which we've been like fine-tuning over the course of this project and other ones.
And numerals also change the way they display decimals, thousands, and millions. And when we started this project, we were all very aware, because there are lots of Latin Americans in our team, that in Spanish, thousands are actually shown as dots, for example. But we weren't aware that there were many systems. And it was only because we worked closely with journalists that Russians then said, oh, you know, we actually space things. And then we have some of the languages in India, for example, space things, as you can see in this example, by commas. So this project allowed us, now we have like a data, like a proper spreadsheet where we have like numerals in this language goes like this and dates go like this, so that we can apply them to all projects. And this was thanks to, you know, talking to actual local journalists. And then there was also like cultural nuances. So when we started again and we presented the test link to Chinese, they said we had red for deaths, which is what we use in English and all languages. But then red is a celebratory color in China. So that wasn't appropriate for their audiences. And we changed it to purple, which was deemed, you know, more culturally relevant to them.
So we have to consider things more than the design and the language when we're making things truly inclusive and global. This could range, so we have to consider the different barriers people have when they're accessing our content. This could range from vision impairment to the affordability and availability of data that Sean mentioned earlier. So one of the ways that we do this is very early on in the project, we create what's called a feature file. This is where we get every member of the team together that's working on a project. So the designer, developer, journalist, tester, project manager all come together and go through every scenario and feature of the project step by step and consider what it looks like from a user's perspective when they interact with it. And this helps us really like pin down the different ways people might be interacting with our content and the different things we might have to consider when we're trying to make it as inclusive and available as possible. So we have to make sure that our content works for screen reader users, keyboard only users, users with color blindness, and where applicable, users with motion sensitivity. So this example is from our How Much Warmer Is Your City project, which was again another big multi-language project. And it has lots of animated content in it, including you can just kind of see the top of a 3D spinning globe. This toggle allows you to turn off animations throughout the entire page, which was specifically brought in for people with vestibular conditions, people that animation can trigger quite serious motion sickness. So yeah, we brought in this animation toggle, and it's also synced up to a preference you can have in your device settings called prefers reduced motion. So if you have that enabled, then the toggle would automatically set to off, so you wouldn't have to see any animation at all. And yeah, it had really good feedback from the wider world. This examples of some really nice feedback we got on Twitter about it. And yeah, it seems to have gone down very well, which was nice. So there are many, so we're talking about keyboard users, there are different people that might use keyboard. This varies from super users who just find it much quicker to interact with their computer using only a keyboard, to people with, say, arthritis who find it really difficult to use a mouse. So we have to make sure when we're building our content that we can navigate it all through just using a keyboard. So this is an example with COVID map, where I'm just tabbing around. And then we also have to consider screen reader users. So this is when people have vision impairments and can't necessarily see the screen, or maybe can but need a bit of extra content and a bit of extra context audibly. So we have to make sure that the information we present is logical, even without any visual cues. Sorry. So often we have to add extra off-screen content to give a bit more context. So in this example, the graph itself is hidden to a screen reader user, but instead we show this table you can see in tabbing through underneath, which a visual sighted user can't see. You can only access using a screen reader. And then we have to consider older browsers and no JavaScript users. So we support back to IE11 at the moment. And so if you're using a browser older than that, you should see an error message, something a bit like this. And again, if you've got no JavaScript as well, you should see something a bit like this. So what we're trying to do is present the core information to the user, so they get at least the main information they want, that we want them to take away, no matter what barriers they're coming with. So in these examples, we have a game that was again made by our Jakarta team, which you'd think you'd have to use JavaScript to be able to get anywhere with, but they managed to make a CSS only version where you could still play the game even if you didn't have JavaScript enabled. And then we have an example of the poll tracker for the UK elections. And again, this screenshot is completely without JavaScript. So what we did was create a script which would show, take a screenshot of the graph and then have it as a fallback image. So if you didn't have JavaScript enabled, you'd still be able to see the entire poll tracker graph, as well as the table we brought in the data set before at build time, rather than when you're accessing the page. But sometimes we can't do it. So if, for example, you have to type in your postcode to get any information we want to show you, which is quite often the case with our UK-based projects, we can't provide any data without JavaScript. So we have these custom upgrade your browser messages. And this is the case from our Green Diet project, where we wanted to have a little bit more fun with it. We have to consider the context that people access our content from. This can be including the internet connections, the cost of data that Sean mentioned earlier, and even the devices vary greatly from city to city, region to region. So what we make sure to do is make sure that the size of our web page doesn't negatively impact the user too much. So we spend a lot of time making sure it's as light as possible. We can do this by lazy loading images so that they only load once the user scrolls them into view. We make sure to minify all the files we have to make them as small as possible. And we only bring in the data that we need, or that the user needs, and we split it up into as smaller chunks as possible. There's lots of other things we do around caching and other ways we can decrease the page weight. And this is an example of us using the Google Lighthouse tools to check how the performance improvements we're making are actually impacting the project. So
editorially, making a data story global is not only about adapting it, but making it personal enough for people to relate. So I am going to show you, the next example is just a very common subject globally, which is like food inflation, and then how these regional visual journalism hubs that we've been talking about then adapted it to their own needs. So the food inflation calculator was made by the nearest hub for the Turkish service, because they wanted something. Inflation is a very contentious subject in Turkey, very political. So they wanted to show it in like everyday things. And they showed this food inflation calculator, which would take like 3 very traditional Turkish recipes, and then boil it down to the ingredients, and then show how the difference was from 2009 to 2019. Then I think like 6 months later, this was adapted by the Americans VJ Hub for the Argentinian elections, because hyperinflation is also like a very big problem in Argentina. And they made it with the traditional asado, which is like the barbecue, you know, this is like a very big thing for Argentinians. And again, they compared, and they also showed like the level of hyperinflation, and they included the dessert, for example, the flan, which I think it's more global. Then this was taken by the nearest hub then developed it for Iran. And they incorporated like a shopping basket in which, if you can see in the screen grab, that you could actually put some products that are relevant for Iranians, and then you would get a receipt. And then down below, you can also see some traditional Iranian dishes like the tea, where they have like bread, cheese, and tea. And then finally it was taken by the Delhi hub for Indian languages. And then it would actually, they kind of turned the way around. What would 100 rupees buy you in each particular year? So you would have things like transport, and then my favorite, which was like tea leaves that are very particular to Indian audiences. And then for me, I have to say editorially, I would say that if you want to incorporate all this and how to translate things and make them multilingual, I think the key is to make it a learning experience. And then this is where you find a bit. When I started, I think we were really only about like how to flip things right to left accordingly, and maybe how to accommodate for what we call like long languages like Russian and Spanish. But then it's so in our daily workflow now that for a recent project I worked in, which you had these beautiful WhatsApp modules coming in which messages would come in, it was actually the developer who contacted and said, do you know if for Arabic, the ticks, are they right to left? Are they left to right? Where do they show up? So then we contacted the designer in Cairo, who would actually send me messages. And we would try to see whether whether they were, and it was a discovery for me. Because then it actually takes it to an extra line so that, it's still Western, but it still accommodates for, the reading right to left models. Then there was what we call the Japanese and Korean bug, which showed up in a drop-down. This is a vaccines drop-down in which you can actually put your country name, and it will tell you which vaccines have been administered in your country. And all the percentage of population vaccinated. And the Japanese language contacted us and say, when we tap on it and it autocompletes, it gives us an empty list of results. So what is going on? And this was a very long investigation involving our team. Someone in our team actually managed to, how do you test the Japanese keyword? We all have Western keywords. So he figured out that if you took it to Google Translate and then you went phonetic, then you could actually figure out, and then you install the Japanese keyword, you could actually figure it out. And then we were like, but how come China works, for example? And then we kind of discovered that China is written in Chinese characters in Japanese. And then this went on, and the developer then tested and tested for a long time until he came up with a solution for what we thought was a bug. And then when I asked, he just went, long story, combined character code 2229 was the culprit. Combined characters is characters that you have to click on a keyboard twice to get them, to form them. And this was confusing the dropdown in which you sent the first character and I thought, oh yeah, they're typing, but it hasn't changed. The word hasn't changed. So I'm turning no results. So what the developer described as a flaw in the logic was only found out because then Japanese and Korean use combined characters, and this was fixed for all interactives in the future. I find this amazing. I don't know about you. So my other example is grammatical intricacies. So these interactive, and actually all interactives that we have a numerical element, obviously, that changes if the data set changes or is fed to it, and then it has a string element of it that doesn't change. We have very clever interactives that change things for singular and plural, right? But then Serbian said, no, it doesn't work for us because, we don't have like singular and plural. We have many ways of changing nouns according to numbers. And this is when I learned that they not only, I'm sorry, I had to write this down because it's just, they not only have like singular and plural, they have noun changes for 1, more than 5, and then 234 particularly. And this, they say, it's because they wanted, this is historically, they wanted to make the difference between smaller and larger communities. And this is why nouns are very complicated and they change. This we couldn't fix. And I think it's something to be fixed for the future because it's just so complicated. But then they added the most beautiful disclaimer I ever seen in Serbian, which you see in the bottom of this interactive, which says, you will notice some grammar inconsistencies, but machines have not yet learned how to change nouns in grammar cases. So this is almost poetic. And then finally, this is an example I took from Becky. So Becky was working on, as I said, the Persian calendar for this beautiful scrolly about how pandemics end. And it has this calendar, this animation, SVG animation, am I right?
It's actually just text and CSS.
sorry. So it's sexist, it's sexist CSS that changes. And I think it took her a whole day to find it because they got negatives and where does the Persian calendar begin? And then after that, I just said, I offered her, obviously, like, you need a drink. And then I said, really sorry for all this. And then she said the most beautiful phrase that she says, with your reading, but I'll just say it again. It's just, one day we'll all know every language quirks, or at least have a bit of code that does. And for me, that sums up the multidisciplinary approach to figuring out languages. And this is why we all have to work together from our different disciplines to make data visualizations truly global.